Imagine being trapped on an island, not a tropical paradise with palm trees and beaches, but a place where violence is currency, fear is constant, and survival is never guaranteed. This is not a war zone. It's not a battlefield. It's Rikers Island, New York City's notorious jail complex, often called the city's island of the damned. For decades, Rikers has been described as one of the most dangerous correctional facilities in America. It's a place where gangs control entire cell blocks, where guards live in fear of the very inmates they are supposed to manage, and where corruption and brutality run so deep that even the courts have called it a human rights crisis. But how did this infamous jail come to be? Why does it continue to spiral out of control? And what really happens behind those walls, far from the public eye? Today, we're going deep inside Rikers Island, its violent past, its chaotic present, and the haunting stories of those who lived and died within its walls. Rikers Island sits in the East River, between Queens and the Bronx. At 413 acres, it's one of the largest jail complexes in the world. From a distance, it looks like nothing more than a cluster of low-slung buildings and watchtowers, surrounded by razor wire and the waters of New York Harbor. But inside, it's a city within a city, once holding over 20,000 inmates at its peak in the 1990s. Unlike prisons, which house convicted felons, Rikers is primarily a jail. That means most of its population consists of people awaiting trial, men and women who have not yet been convicted of a crime. Some are there for petty theft, others for violent felonies, but many are locked up simply because they can't afford bail. In other words, Rikers is a melting pot of the guilty and the innocent, forced to coexist in one of the harshest environments imaginable. Over the years, countless horror stories have emerged. Guards beaten unconscious during riots. Inmates stabbed over stolen commissary snacks. Young detainees driven to suicide in solitary confinement. A culture where corruption, neglect, and gang violence are everyday realities. The island's history is as dark as its reputation. The jail complex was first opened in the 1930s, named after Richard Riker, a descendant of one of New York's early Dutch families. Ironically, Richard Riker himself was notorious for corruption. He was accused of using his power as a judge in the 1800s to send free black New Yorkers into slavery under false pretenses. Perhaps it was a bad omen. The island that bore his name would go on to become a symbol of systemic abuse and injustice in modern America. By the 1970s and 1980s, New York City was in the grip of crime waves, gang wars, and an exploding prison population. Rikers became the dumping ground. Cells meant for 2 men would hold 4. Dormitories designed for 30 inmates crammed in 60. The city had nowhere else to send them, so Rikers grew bigger, meaner, and more violent. It wasn't just the inmates who suffered. The staff, underpaid and understaffed, faced constant threats. Many turned to corruption, smuggling in contraband for extra cash, or looking the other way during gang fights. The line between guard and prisoner blurred, creating an environment of chaos that persists to this day. To understand Rikers, you need to picture what daily life looks like. At dawn, the steel doors slam open. Guards shout, "Roll call." Hundreds of inmates shuffle into the corridors, some half asleep, some already alert, watching their backs. Breakfast is usually cold oatmeal or rubbery eggs, barely edible, but it doesn't matter, because for many, food is just another commodity to be stolen or traded. On the housing units, gangs run the show. The Bloods, the Latin Kings, the Trinitarios, and countless neighborhood crews claim territory inside the dorms. New inmates quickly learn. If you're not affiliated, you're vulnerable. Protection has a price, and those who can't pay often get tested with beatdowns, extortion, or worse. Violence is never far away. Stabbings, known as cuts, happen so often that inmates fashion weapons out of toothbrushes, razors, and even metal from broken light fixtures. Guards know it too. Many admit they fear entering certain cell blocks without backup because the balance of power is not always in their favor. Rikers isn't just dangerous because of the inmates. The environment itself is toxic. Cells are cramped, poorly ventilated, and often filthy. Mold creeps up the walls, rats scurry through the dorms, and broken toilets overflow for days. In the summer, the heat is unbearable. In the winter, the cold seeps into your bones. For many, Rikers feels less like a jail and more like a dungeon. Some names have become forever tied to Rikers' dark legacy. Khalif Browder, a 16-year-old arrested in 2010 for allegedly stealing a backpack, spent 3 years at Rikers without trial. He endured constant beatings and nearly 2 years in solitary confinement. After his release, the trauma was so deep he eventually took his own life at age 22. His story sparked national outrage and shined a spotlight on the cruelty of the bail system. Jerome Murdo, a homeless veteran, was arrested for trespassing in 2014. He was placed in a Rikers cell with a malfunctioning heating system. Temperatures rose to over 100 degrees. Jerome was found dead, baked alive in his cell. Countless unnamed inmates, men and women whose stories never make the news, have suffered broken bones, untreated illnesses, and psychological scars that last a lifetime. Each case reveals a pattern, neglect, violence, and a system that seems incapable of reform. To outsiders, Rikers Island might look like a place where correctional officers hold total power. But ask the officers themselves and you'll hear a very different story. They're just as trapped as the inmates they oversee. Correctional officers at Rikers work some of the toughest shifts in America. Many describe it as walking into a war zone every day. The stress is crushing. Imagine being outnumbered 30-1 in a dorm full of men who see you as the enemy. Officers are armed only with batons, pepper spray, and their voices. Guns are not allowed inside housing units. That means when a fight breaks out, when razor blades flash and blood spills across the floor, the officer must either jump into the chaos or call for backup and hope help arrives before it's too late. It's no wonder many officers burn out or turn corrupt. Smuggling becomes a lucrative side hustle. Inmates will pay hundreds of dollars for cell phones, drugs, or even cigarettes, and officers who bring them in risk little more than suspension if caught. The system feeds the corruption: low pay, poor training, and an administration more focused on headlines than on real safety. And while some officers truly do their best to maintain order, many others admit they simply pick their battles. They allow gangs to police themselves, turning a blind eye so long as the violence doesn't explode out of control. The result? A jail where the line between law enforcer and lawbreaker is constantly blurred. The horrors of Rikers Island are no secret. Activists, journalists, lawyers, and even politicians have called it a humanitarian disaster. Lawsuits have piled up, costing New York City hundreds of millions of dollars in settlements for brutality, negligence, and wrongful deaths. In 2017, then-Mayor Bill de Blasio announced a bold plan. Rikers Island would close within a decade. The city would replace it with smaller, borough-based jails meant to be safer and more humane. The announcement was celebrated as a historic step forward. But years later, the timeline has already been pushed back, and skepticism runs high. Many believe politics, bureaucracy, and the sheer scale of the project will delay closure for decades. Meanwhile, inside Rikers, the violence continues. In recent years, inmate deaths have surged, some from overdoses, others from suicide, still others from medical neglect. Critics argue that closing the jail won't be enough. The entire criminal justice system needs an overhaul, from bail reform to mental health treatment. But for those trapped inside right now, guards and inmates alike, reform feels like a distant dream. Survival is the only goal. Every day on Rikers is a gamble. Will you make it through without injury, without humiliation, without losing a piece of your humanity? For the world outside, Rikers Island stands as a haunting symbol of America's larger problems with mass incarceration, poverty, and systemic neglect. Whether it closes in 5 years, 10 years, or never, its legacy is already written in blood and broken lives. If this deep dive into inside Rikers Island shook you, remember, this is just one story among many in America's prison system. Now it's your turn. Hit that like button if you believe more people need to hear these stories. Subscribe so you don't miss the next documentary-style breakdown we've got coming. And drop a comment below. Do you think closing Rikers will fix the problem, or just move it somewhere else? Your engagement helps this channel keep shining a light on the places most people would rather forget. Together, we can make sure these voices are not lost.